mask accommodations. Mask accommodations are approved through a team review, which involves our school leader, our school nurse, and other appropriate school staff. Next slide, please. It is our recommendation that students maintain a minimum of 3 feet distance at all times to the greatest extent possible. As guided by the Strong Schools Toolkit, we are also recommending when possible that adults keep a 6-foot minimum distance. At this time, I will turn it over to Dr. Julius Monk, Deputy Superintendent for Operational Services.
Thank you, Dr. Hardy, and good evening, Board of Education, Dr. Mabanga. Next slide, please. As you would notice on the slide, the previous was very restrictive. When we first came back to school, we came under Plan B. And even on buses, we were required to have the social distancing. Later on, they kind of relaxed that to say 1 student per seat, which moves us up from having about 8 students on the bus to 24. And they have since relaxed that as well with going back in Plan A, where you can have students on the bus so long as they are having their face covering. What we learned from our summer school was it's a great idea to have seating charts on our buses so that when there is a case, whether it be at school that we learn about it or from the health department, that we can see where our students are sitting, regardless if they're at school or on the bus, so that we can do active contact tracing. We do not plan to change that as we go into the new school year. We're going to stay within those same best practices. Next slide, please. Cleaning and hygiene, some of the same things. We went to the board, got additional custodial staff allotments to do high frequency cleaning whenever we first came back under the pandemic. Since then, the science has suggested that we don't have to do the disinfecting as frequent as we were doing before. The toolkit now recommends that you do it once a day, and whenever you have a case in one of those areas that you disinfect. How we differ from the toolkit is that we're not only cleaning once a day, but we're also disinfecting all of our occupied spaces once a day as well, regardless if we have a case there or not. Next slide, please. And then school nutrition and how we're providing meals. Initially, cafeterias were all closed off and congregate settings were not allowed under the toolkit. How we operated over summer learning was a lot of meals in the classrooms, as well as when we first came back under Plan B. Obviously, with the number of students that we're now having to serve with everyone being back, the cafeteria is back into play. It's left to the school discretion how they schedule that cafeteria so that large classes may go to the cafeteria, still social distancing to the greatest extent possible, and then others may eat in their rooms. Some are rotating that, where some days you get to eat in the cafeteria, some days outside, some days in the room. We're giving the schools the greatest flexibility so that they can work it around in their schedule. But we're still providing the prepackaged meals in either event. As with the outdoor, of course, that's going to be limited by weather, especially as we go into the cold and wetter times of the year. But for this time of the year, where sometimes it's mild, I know we're entering the dog days of summer now, the DPS Foundation and working with Dr. Mabanga, they did provide our schools with an opportunity to submit for grants for picnic tables and other things that they could do for outside. In addition to that, we spoke some about this whenever we first applied for ESSER funds, is that we were going to be doing outdoor learning centers or classrooms. We've been working with academic services and curriculum instruction to make sure that those spaces are going to be adequate for our students learning. As we said before, that's going to look different for everyone because we have some ordinances as it relates to impervious surfaces, meaning we can't put permanent sheltering type fixtures in certain places. But we're going to work with the schools to get the best space possible in those areas. Because we're using federal funds, we have to get those approved by DPI. And so we are working on a really good process with our finance department, with Dr. Danner and our federal programs to get those projects approved as soon as possible as they start to come online from our staff. And then we'll be implementing those. But our schools have various ways to meet the school nutrition needs of our students and to spread out as much as possible. And our school nutrition staff, I really want to lift them up because our director has been out for a little while, and our assistant director, Ms. Robin Brooks, has stepped in, done a fabulous job keeping our students fed through year-round and extended year, and all the cafeteria staff that are in there working every day to keep our students fed. And so we think that this is going to be a good plan to keep our operations moving as smoothly as possible. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Harvey.
Thank you, Dr. Monk. Next slide, please. Specials and electives. Students will receive specials and elective instruction for 30 to 45 minutes daily in our elementary schools and 1 block or period daily in our secondary schools. Our specials classes will follow our current face covering guidelines, and this includes when they are engaged in activities such as singing and/or playing instruments. We've provided our schools with the appropriate PPE and special masks for students to wear while playing our wind instruments. In addition, bell covers will be used for instruments indoors. Equipment and other supplies will also be cleaned and disinfected regularly. Next slide, please. Physical education. In addition to the guidance that has been given regarding specials and our elective classes, students will participate in physical education classes, and they will also follow our face covering guidelines. Students will be required to wash and sanitize hands prior to entering the classroom and using any equipment. Next slide, please. Field trips. Field trips provide our students with additional experiential learning and opportunities for students to have a shared social and educational experience in authentic settings. We are recommending that we allow for field trips when they align to our current board policy and provided we can ensure our current safety protocols can be adhered to. Next slide, please. Extracurricular activities. We are excited for our students to return and participate in our extracurricular activities as we safely begin rehearsals and events. Participants in activities and events will follow our current face covering guidelines and our physical distancing guidelines. Spectators will be permitted and are expected to follow those same guidelines. In the event that they involve ticket sales, schools may utilize our touchless ticket sales. Concessions will be allowed when items can be pre-packaged. Next slide. Athletics. Our athletic programs are continuing and are underway as students continue to return. They will continue with our current face covering requirements. And now we are requiring, our recommendation is to require indoor athletes to wear face coverings while competing. We will allow our spectators with no capacity limits, and guests will be required to adhere to face covering guidelines and physical distance protocols. While indoors, all will be required to wear face coverings. Programs will continue to practice the touchless online ticket sales, and pre-packaged concessions will be allowed. We will also now allow weight room and locker room access with adequate social distancing and face covering requirements. Next slide, please. Durham Public Schools will continue to follow our guidelines provided by the Center for Disease Control, the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services, and the North Carolina Strong Schools Toolkit. We recognize as we continue to have updates and as a team, as Dr. Mabinga mentioned, to make sure that we monitor those guidelines and updates as they're provided by our state. While Durham Public Schools COVID dashboard was not active during our summer months, it will be reinstated beginning the week of August 16th. In addition, we are working to provide additional staffing to support timely and adequate contact tracing and communication to our employees and families, and make sure that that is updated on our COVID-19 dashboard. Next slide, please. In an effort to ensure that we are able to maintain communication, we are going to have a new COVID health and safety team. This team will be led by our COVID-19 manager, who will be our point person and also responsible for conducting our daily COVID meetings, gathering information, and work very closely with lead nurse Howard, as well as the Durham County Health Department. We will also have a COVID communication specialist and a team of contact tracers. These positions will work very closely, not only with our nurse, the Office of Public Affairs, our principals, and the Multilingual Resource Center to ensure that we are continuing our communication and transparency regarding the COVID cases in Durham Public Schools. Next slide, please. We want to acknowledge, as we transition back to in-person, that we will continue to have a greater need for social and emotional supports for our students and staff. And although we will not have Wellness Wednesday where students are not in school, we want to acknowledge that Wellness Wednesday still exists with the DPS Embrace website. In support of our social and emotional well-being, it is really important that we continue to have resources and tools that are available for our students and staff. Each of our schools has a selected cultural framework, which includes responsive classroom, capturing kids' hearts, and/or restorative justice. We will also continue our partnership with Panorama, which helps our students providing success and how they develop in their own social emotional learning and develop skills to make sure that they are continuing in a safe manner. We also like to acknowledge and thank our current mental health partners. Having co-located mental health in our schools provides a service that our students can receive during the school day. Families can make referrals by contacting their school's counselor and/or social worker. Next slide, please. Ignite Online Academy. We would like to provide a few updates regarding Ignite Online Academy. We know Ignite Online was approved by our board, and we had a window of an opportunity for our families to register for Ignite. And this will provide an opportunity for culturally responsive, personalized on-learning experiences for our youngsters. Next slide, please. At the time of submission for our presentation, there were 569 students that were enrolled in Ignite Online Academy. As of this morning, there are over 700 students currently enrolled in Ignite. The Ignite team is hard at work creating staffing and schedules to accommodate all of our students at a high level of service. This includes accommodating students that receive special services, such as our students with disabilities, our English learners, and our students that are part of our advanced academics program. Device pickup for enrolled students will begin on August 18th with high school and then continue with middle and elementary school on August 19th and 23rd. This will provide an opportunity for students to connect with their Ignite teachers and receive their devices. Families should expect direct communication and phone communication with detailed information from Principal Hickson. Ignite is excited to bring innovative programming to all of the students who are participating. Next slide, please. We would like to acknowledge that we know the coronavirus and this pandemic has impacted all of us, not only personally, locally, nationally, and internationally. And it has had an impact on how we coexist and how we think about school. It is our commitment to ensure that we are prepared for our students to come back in person and that we are collaboratively working with our partners in Durham as well as across the state to ensure that we have robust learning experiences for our students. Some of our next steps include working directly with our schools and school level planning, making sure that we're having communication with our families during open house events that will begin next week, and making sure that we are being willing to modify and make any necessary changes based on what we are hearing from our local community health partners. At this time, we will open ourselves up for questions and discussion. We have several staff that are here, and this is before the board tonight for action.
Thank you, Dr. Hardy, and thank you to your whole team. We can see that so much work and thought has been put into this, and we want to thank our people that are actually living this in year-round schools, that worked all summer in our summer camps, that our small specialty high schools are going strong, and we're learning day by day. I appreciate your willingness to be responsive and listen to the community as this pandemic evolves. I will open it up to colleagues and see where questions are. Hard to read face language, body language with masks, but I'm gonna go Miss Umstead. I saw her getting towards the mic. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Gotta read our eyes. Thank you all for this presentation. Like you said, Dr. Hardy, you led us off with, a week ago when we submitted this, we were in one place. 2 weeks ago, before you submitted, we were in another place. And truly, this pandemic is changing day by day, minute by minute, honestly. And so I appreciate y'all opening this with the flexibility piece. I want parents to hear that we're learning every day, and we're going to be Durham has been extra cautious in this pandemic and will continue to be cautious in this pandemic as we learn more information every day about what's going on. I wanted to know if y'all had any insights from our year-round schools and small schools who have started. Did that influence some of this work, or any things you can share from what we've seen already?
Absolutely. We want to thank our year-round principals and staff. They have, and all of our principals have provided feedback as we are making our recommendations to the board. We have had a great opportunity to learn from the cases that we have had and our COVID task force, and making sure that we're being thoughtful. And we really do appreciate their honest feedback and helping us ensure that we're providing tools and resources to help support our principals and our school communities during the pandemic.
All right, I have a couple other questions. With our events that we're looking at potentially having for athletic, and maybe less athletics because they're outdoors right now, but when it comes to indoor, will we have any capacity limits, or was that previously based just on the state order?
So our indoor capacity limits in the past were based on the state executive order. We do not have any capacity limits right now. It is our recommendation for our indoor athletic events that all of our spectators wear face coverings. And that right now for fall sports, that would be including volleyball. For our outdoor, if you are not in a position where you can socially distance, then we are asking that you wear face coverings. Our athletes will be wearing face coverings even while competing indoors. And concessions will only provide prepackaged food.
I think this is my last one. I might have another one. And I've gotten some emails from folks who are asking, will we go back to a hybrid system? And I think we saw there were lots of challenges with that earlier this year. Can y'all maybe explain a little bit about why we want to make sure that we're focused on this in-person piece?
We are committed for this particular academic year to ensure that our teachers have the opportunity to focus on either youngsters that are in person so that they're able to see, or the students that they are teaching online. We are aware that when we do have students that have to go into quarantine and potentially an entire class, we have worked with our principals to make sure that our students have access to instruction. We want to thank our board and our community. You all were committed over a year ago to ensuring that we had resources so that our students are one-to-one, and leveraging that opportunity when students do have to be in quarantine so they have access to high quality instruction. And to the extent possible, teachers will, if that entire class is on quarantine and they have the ability, we'll have live stream, so the Zoom access for students. And then making sure that we are continuing to make sure we have that two-way communication. If you remember when we were virtual, we worked really hard to make sure that we were connecting with our families and communities. That doesn't need to stop now that we are in person. And that two-way communication to make sure that the student has access to instruction and we are able to monitor how that student is doing at home, especially if they are quarantined, is really important. And that allows our teachers to make sure that they're focusing their instruction on that one mode. So the students that are in person, or if they are in Ignite Online Academy, that they are focusing on the virtual and online instruction.
Just want to add, I think our hopes are pretty much for a student to receive in-person instruction. And nobody can tell what tomorrow dealing with this Delta variant can bring to us. As much as possible, if we can maximize with in-person learning, that's what we're trying to do. But our community need to know that we are very conservative as Durham when it comes to COVID. when times are really bad, it's not going to take us long before we can come and have another conversation. But we really want to maximize as much as possible with in-person instructions, because remote instruction, a lot of our students were really miserable. We don't want to get to that point yet. We hope that things are going to get better as we're going to continue planning with in-person learning.
This is actually my last. Dr. Hardy, if parents have questions about what this will look like at my school, I think in this next couple of weeks, I've heard from a lot of folks like, well, what does this mean for me at school? How do they get that information?
So two ways. The first way is, and I see Mr. Sutter transitioning, we do have a back to school page on our website. And so there will be lots of information on that back to school page. I think also Dr. Monk mentioned this as we was talking about school nutrition. All of our schools will be having open house events, and those events, throughout those events, they will be going through the specific details of that particular school. So how you get your bus routes for that particular school, what, if you're a car rider, what that looks like at your particular school, how lunch is going to look at your particular school. So really using that open house event to make sure that you have an opportunity to connect with your school principal and other school leaders and your youngster's teacher, so that you know exactly what those procedures are going to be at that school. That's another great opportunity to make sure that you are aware of what's going to happen when we begin school on the 24th.
And just to reiterate what Dr. Hardy has shared, we are going to be adding to the back to school page on the district website and sharing through social media, email to families directly, et cetera, a summary of our recommendations with any modifications that this board may be doing in the process of approving this plan. And that will be going out tomorrow. It will be straightforward, and it will speak to all of the things that we can be universal about for all 53 schools, while recognizing things like lunches and transportation. Schools are going to have to use that flexibility that Dr. Hardy referred to make the best and safest environment for those individual schools. So we will provide consistent information that is universally applicable to all 53 schools, but the schools themselves are the best source for parents to go to for the specifics.
Thank you all for all your hard work on this.
I saw Mr. Lee and then Ms. Valladares, and then I'll go to Mr. Sears, who's texted, and then I'll go to Mr. Raven. Has that, and we'll bounce around because I know we've got a lot of complicated things to consider. Thank you.
And first, I will say I appreciate the way the presentation is laid out. There's a lot of question. Can you guys hear me? No, test. Maybe I just need to get closer. Sorry about that. All right. I appreciate the way the presentation is laid out, and it seems to address a lot of questions that we're getting via email and so forth. So I do appreciate that. My question is really around Ignite Online Academy. I want to understand a little better of, the sign up. Are signups for Ignite still going? I know that there are some questions from parents that are, initially, they say, well, we want to go back into the building, but with the Delta variant kind of coming, I'm gonna list a few questions that I have, and I'll just we'll see how we cover them here. And now they're saying, well, I want to go to Ignite, because until vaccinations for the younger kids are available, we're just going to do Ignite and so forth. So my questions here are the Ignite signups, Ignite Online Academy signups still available? Will it close at some point? And then here's probably more a tougher question is, when you sign up for Ignite, you're committed for the entire year, right? I want to make sure, and I'm asking this because I want to make sure that Ignite is not a stopgap or a substitute until children are vaccinated. So where they're saying, well, we're just going to be online until we get vaccinated, then we want to go back into the building. Ignite is a school. And I'm guessing if you want to go back into even your base school, you would need like a transfer appeal for, that would go through that process and everything. I'm wondering because I get the feeling that Ignite may be seen as a hybrid until children can get vaccinated. And if that's okay, fine, I don't know. But if it's not, I think we need to make that clear for the families who are now choosing Ignite, who want to go into Ignite because of the Delta variant until vaccine is available.
So I think I can address all your questions. I would like Mr. Hickson's already here, Mr. Hickson and Ms. Marshall to step in just in case I miss anything. So our initial enrollment period for Ignite was July 30th. That was the end date. We extended that date to August 2nd. So the enrollment period for Ignite Online Academy has closed. So one of the things that we have to acknowledge is that, and you mentioned this in your comments, is that our commitment for any of our schools is for that academic year. And we want to make sure that families are making that commitment to Ignite for the academic year. And our board and our recommendation, if you remember earlier, it's hard, I think in the spring, our commitment was if you make the choice to go to Ignite, then you are relinquishing your magnet seat for that particular year so that you're making that commitment to participate in Ignite Online Academy. And our board did approve our application to the state for a new school number. At this time, the enrollment is closed for Ignite. We want to make sure that we have the opportunity not only with staffing, but to ensure that we are able to provide still that personalization, even though those students are online. It's not necessarily appropriate for us to have 100 students with one teacher. So being very thoughtful around the staffing, and initially Ignite was staffed at 500 students. And we know that we at this time are well over 700 students due to our opportunity to extend the opportunity for students and families to make that choice. If families are still interested in Ignite, we are working to make sure that what our families do is they work with our student assignment process, just as I would if I wanted to go to another school other than my assigned base school. And so you work with our student assignment office, and then we are able to, it's very similar to a waiting list to see if students would be able to have access to Ignite. We also have to be mindful, Ignite is a K through 12 school, and we have legislation that is very clear on the number of students that can be in our classrooms, kindergarten, first, second, and third grade. And there are limits that are based on that particular legislation. And we actually, as a school district, Dr. Mabinga, have to attest every year that we are adhering to that K3 class size legislation. So at this time, if families have questions or they would like to enroll, the first thing that they would need to do is to contact student assignment, or they can also contact their current school principal just to make sure that they are aware of any of the procedures that are happening in our schools, and to talk to that principal and the school community about what mitigating factors that we are experiencing in that school so that families have those questions answered as we transition. I see Dr. Spencer nodding. I just want to look to her, and I think the other team, if there is something that I missed or did I answer all of your questions?
You answered. I really appreciate that. Thank you. That's all I have.
Ms. Valladares.
Thank you so much for all the updates. And again, I just want to reiterate just the gratitude that, we have flexibility, and also because, we can't possibly be at all the sites. We now have 54 schools, right? And every school has their own special dynamics and all that. So I really appreciate the way that even at the school sites, there's a lot of discretion as to, things that are needed, including the folks that are there to volunteer. I really have questions about the volunteers. I did see that, volunteers are permitted, and we've gotten a lot of emails, a lot of engagement around who can be deemed a volunteer during this pandemic, during this time. Obviously, it's limited based on capacity. But, we have over the span of this pandemic, definitely developed some partnerships with organizations, including Duke University. We have a lot of parents who, work in the health field who have lended their supports. We even had, advisors, from the institution, and are also, equally DPS parents. And so can you tell us more about like the volunteers, just more specifics about volunteering? And also, I think one of the things is that we heard, we've been hearing from community about the need for, just every school has, PTAs, they have all kinds of like PAC, they have all kinds of groups, people who have been holding it down during this pandemic, providing supports. I did hear more of a request about outdoor, like, is there a distinction between if they're going to volunteer outdoors, during lunchtime, especially if we are encouraging outdoor, mealtime. Any of those distinctions would be great.
We want to, show our gratitude to our community partners. We have had, Durham is a place where we have lots of folks who want to help our schools. And our recommendation is that we allow our community partners and volunteers to have access to our schools. What we are recommending is that if you are coming to our schools to work with and support our students in any capacity, that you be allowed to do so, with the caveat and the expectation that you are going to go through the screening process and adhere to our protocols. So we have many, you mentioned Duke University, college advisors. We have partners that we work with through Ms. Giovanni's office in terms of our MOUs and other organizations. And I don't want to list all of them because I know I would probably leave someone out, but those organizations that have that are providing supports to our students, our co-located mental health partners, will have access to our schools. They will go through the screening when they enter. They will take their temperature. The temperature, I was going to say gauge, I'm not sure if that's the appropriate wall, are usually mounted right there on the walls when you walk into the front office. They are going to be expected to adhere to our other guidelines, such as always wearing a face covering while they are indoors. And our schools will work with them to make sure that they're providing the services to students. The same is also for any of our professional learning partners. If there's a service that we're providing to our teachers for professional learning, that we allow those visitors and volunteers to come in to provide those kinds of supports.
Thank you so much. I do have a follow-up question to that, and then another question not related to this topic or the topic of volunteers. Speaking of institutions, I work at one of those institutions listed, and one of the things that they have required is for me to upload my vaccination record, right? And so I have uploaded proof of that, and that is something that sometimes institutions will require of their employees, something that DPS is not requiring of the volunteers. But how are we also, in a way, keeping in mind vaccination status? Any guidelines on that? If folks, it goes two ways. I think that a lot of the emails that we got, some of the concerns I got about limiting volunteers was related to vaccinations. And it goes both ways. So any guidance on vaccinated status, unvaccinated status, and volunteers?
I'll take on that question. I think we're pretty much taking a gradual process here as requirements are concerned. At this point, we have not decided yet whether or not we're going to require this to be a part of volunteering, so that HR or working with our attorneys, whether or not we're going to require this to be housed in our district. We're taking this pretty much in a gradual process. I've heard some recommendations about staff members being required, vaccination, things of that nature. I think with the protocol that we have in place, I think we're feeling pretty much comfortable. We're going to be able to mitigate the spread of virus. But if we're going to get to the point where if things are getting really bad, that we need to get to that step of requiring, and I think we'll be bringing those recommendations to our board, but we're not there yet.
I'm sorry, while we're on this, which is very much on my heart, do we have a white paper analysis from Tharrington Smith, something on how we move towards vaccine requirements for staff, for volunteers, for students? And knowing that we anticipate FDA full approval to be forthcoming shortly, how are you all thinking about that as a best practice for public health? I know we're still working on it, but
Yes, we're still working on it, as you said, CDC. We're following those requirements as well as North Carolina Strong toolkit. They have not made that as a requirement at this point. I think off record sometimes I will gauge my board to see where they are with that particular topic. And then once I feel like our board, that's the direction that they would like for us to go, then we'll be able to consult with our board attorney and then make that final decision. So I'm here to serve you. I want to listen. I want to know where you guys stand when it comes to that. And then we'll be able to consult with our board attorney.
Thank you so much. I do have another question. So I have gone to orientation, and it's one of the things I noticed is that some sites, particularly the site that I went to for orientation, has a wellness clinic. And I don't know the capacity for access to, I know that we have done a lot of things about COVID vaccines being accessible through partnerships that we have had with our partners, ways that, our school sites, like Southern was a site for vaccination, partnerships where Wheels, has provided, and throughout the community with the Department of Health and Human Services. I mean, there's been a whole lot in terms of accessibility, but there are some schools that have wellness, and say for example, if children don't have their vaccinations, others, any others, whether tetanus shots or any other shot that they need, that they can access that in the school sites. Are we looking to expand that? Can you tell us a little more if there's any information about whether they will have capacity to provide, say, a COVID vaccine for families that for other reasons haven't been able to get one?
So I'm also going to, I know that Nurse Howard and Nurse Thompson are here behind me as well in terms of community access. Our nurses are working very closely with our principals and our families regarding immunizations to make sure that not just regarding knowing if students are vaccinated, but making sure that they are prepared to come to school and have met all of the immunization requirements for that particular grade level, as well as making sure they're working with families regarding healthcare plans for our students that may have any other illnesses such as asthma, type 2 diabetes, that we are taking care of our youngsters, and that there is support from our DPS nurses, as well as the regional support that we're receiving from the health department and the nurses that are serving our schools. So we definitely have a commitment to making sure that we continue to do that. And as partners are coming to us, working very carefully to make sure as much access and working closely with our health department that we're able to provide that. And I'm not sure if Nurse Howard or Nurse Thompson have anything to add to that.
Nurse Howard, sorry, I asked you to come to the mic. Thank you so much.
So DPS has two wellness clinics, one at Hillside High School and one at Southern. I've spoken to both providers at both settings about vaccination options. However, they're both staffed, operated by different organizations. So one is operated through Duke, one is operated through Lincoln. And I think they were looking at whether they could logistically make that happen based on their staffing, if they have access to the vaccine. So that is something that's ongoing. You're welcome.
Thank you so much, Nurse Howard. We are so lucky to have you. Yes, I was talking to I was at Hillside, so I'm just disclosing I was at the orientation at Hillside, yes, and I got to talk to Nurse Cheryl. It was something about I'll get with you. I do apologize to our staff, but definitely very, very wonderful news to know that we are making not only like we're making our health accessible to families. And the last question I had, when we were talking about the Chromebooks for students at quarantine, we are following toolkit, and we're also following guidance from our health department about how long to quarantine students who were exposed to a positive case. So it's not to say that they're going to be out of school for 14 days just because they were in the same classroom. It's going to be something that they follow closely. They look at all the different factors and they make determinations. discretionary determinations based on a case-by-case basis. I do think when it comes to Chromebooks, one of the biggest challenges I do hear from parents, and parents reach out to me about district codes to get into things, or district codes for Power School, district codes for Here Comes the Bus. And also when it comes to accessing NCED Cloud, it's through our DPS devices. It's not through personal devices. And that is a hindrance to a lot of parents who, already submitted their Chromebooks. They have yet to pick up any Chromebooks yet. And, is there, this is more, I guess, for IT and accessibility. We are limiting access from personal devices to access the NCED Cloud and Canvas and Clever and all that. I'm wondering if there's any consideration to, everybody's going to get a device, everybody's going to get a Chromebook eventually, right? At some point, all schools are going to be distributing devices. So that's going to solve that. But I guess for the summer, there were kids who, wanted to access some of these resources, and because they turned in their Chromebook, they couldn't. And that's just something that I heard, and I just wanted to be sure I bring it here and let you all know that those are some of the feedback I was getting.
Okay, yeah, let me follow up with my IT staff about that and get back to you all. Okay, all right, you're welcome.
Thank you so much. That's all my questions for now.
And just to acknowledge for our community, we will be distributing devices to our students. We will not be collecting devices throughout the academic year. So students will have access to their Chromebook so that they can access learning in the event that a student and or a class would have to be in quarantine. And hotspots, absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Bingo.
Thank you, Dr. Hardy. I'll go to Mr. Sears and then to you, Mr. Raven. Let's see if we can get our tech working here for virtual.
Can you guys hear me okay? Hello, hello, test, test, test.
We see you, Mr. Sears. Thank you.
Can you hear me? You can't hear me.
We can hear you and we
Oh.
see you. So you are on display. Welcome to our meeting.
All right.
Fantastic.
Glad to be here. Thank you, administration. We can't state enough how challenging this is and appreciate the hard work. And I don't want any of my questions to be construed as disrespectful to that work. I very much appreciated the public comments that we heard tonight, and they echo a few of my thoughts. So I have a couple of follow-ups and a direct question. And I'm looking at them to see which one makes the most sense. I think this one's for Dr. Hardy. I heard you talk about, what happens when students go into quarantine, and it was clear to me that if a whole class were to go into quarantine, what would happen? However, if it's, one of my students or one of my children or this student or that student, what specifically is going to happen? I understand we have our one-to-one. Are we on like a district pacing guide, and there's going to be, instruction in Canvas that, kindergartner Dean on day 53, boom, this is where he goes. Tell me more about what that looks like for when it's not an entire class, please.
So very similar to what you mentioned. And if we can, unfortunately, if we think pre-COVID, there would have been a time where a youngster in a classroom may have had a particular illness or had been injured and would be out of school for, a couple of weeks. And so similarly, there would be an expectation that our teachers would have that two-way communication with that child and or that child's family to make sure that child had the opportunity, if physically able, to complete assignments. Often that would have been more traditionally in a paper pencil format and activities that we would have sent home with the student. So the same is true if there are a few students that are going to have to quarantine. And so students will have access to resources. Most frequently, those access would be in the learning management system, which is Canvas. And our teachers are actually posting and using that in a manner in their classroom. So students have the opportunity, if you think about the experience that our year-round youngsters are having right now, they do have some paper pencil activities that they're doing, but they also have activities in Canvas. So that particular student or group of students would have access to the work in Canvas. In terms of our district materials, we do have district resources, our district pacing guide, which provides opportunities for teachers in terms of the amount of time that they should be spending on specific standards, as well as the activities and resources that are linked to those specific standards in an electronic format. For our adopted curriculum materials, thanks to our board that has supported that. So if I'm an HMH school, then I have access to that electronic library of books. If I'm an American Reading Company, I still have electronic access to that. Same with Eureka. If I'm in the classroom, I have my Eureka workbook like I saw at Easily last Friday. I also have access to those resources online. And as I mentioned earlier, one of the things that we are continuing to work with our teachers and our families is to make sure that two-way communication is occurring for that particular student or students that may be on quarantine for that particular class.
Thank you for that. That does give me a much better picture. As a former teacher before the one-to-one days, that was the hardest thing. It was those, I think you put it kindly, paper and pencil. It was worksheets, and even getting those together was a challenge as a teacher. I did teach one-to-one pretty early on, and when you're having to do all your lesson planning online where it's accessible, that does make it easier, but we know they're going to miss things that you just can't replicate outside of the classroom experience. So it's not a worry. I think I just want to put this out there because I believe we will hear about it this year. And if we're going to end up with a spectrum, I think, of our staff that will put out the minimum, which is the digital version of the worksheet. And we will have staff that go above and beyond and amaze us with basically running two classes, one for their quarantine kids and one for their face-to-face students. And the part I want to note is that I think our staff is already ragged because of the last 15 months. Something's got to give at some point, whether it's we give in that we give them additional support, additional resources, perhaps additional salary. We're asking a lot, and we're doing that for all of our staff, I know, but I just wanted to highlight that spectrum is going to exist and we're going to need to be ready for it. Thank you for that, Dr. Hardy. If you wanted to say anything, I'll pause, but I'm ready to move to my next question.
She gave you the thumbs up, Matt.
Okay, I can only see myself now. It's very awkward.
Same here, yeah.
I wanted to, this is as much to my colleagues on the board as it is to administration, but Mr. Suttereth a few minutes ago kind of responded to the local decision-making around how to keep students safe when it came to lots of things, but including the lunch, how we execute lunch at various sites. And I think my question is there a negative safety impact if this board were to push very hard tonight for, more of a direct get outside as much as possible policy? Am I missing something that would actually be more dangerous? And this is not like a gotcha question. I'm just trying to make sure I understand everything.
There's a lot of people thinking here, Matt, but I don't know. Dr. Mavinga, did you want to jump in on that?
Not really. I just want to reflect this with my board member, Mr. Sears. As you know, we have one particular high school, Riverside, where they have open lunch. They go outside. Sometimes it's a matter of capacity. If you have a school let's say about 700 students if you have 3 lunches, and then you have about 300 students, depending on the court, the outside capacity that you have, whether or not that's going to be feasible. So we really want you to give us some guidance, but at the same time, we also got to be mindful with our principal that's knowing really the location of the school and the capacity that they can be able to hold whatever 300 or 400 students. So it's going to be a really moving target. We hear you, we heard our parents as well. We really want to make those launches to be as safe as possible, but it's also going to depend on the capacity that we may be able to have outside.
Thank you. And it's not lost on me that operating a school is incredibly challenging, and this is just one factor. And I just firmly believe that people have to make choices, hard ones, and this is one that I would prefer as a board we be stronger on. Encouraging may not be the right word. Mandating certainly is not the right word, especially given your comments, Dr. Mbenga. But if there's something in between where when school leaders are making that decision, they can be thinking outside is where it's at, outside is where it's at. I'm just like-minded with our public comments. It's a place that is the safest we can provide. And I don't want us to not make that choice because it's one of 1,000 decisions that our school leadership have to make day in, day out. So thanks for that. I think my final topic is back to the vaccination space, and I have 2 questions here. I'll try to be brief. Ms. Vaidar, is the topic you brought up about volunteers to me triggers where we got in the conversation about vaccinating on campus and having those 2 partners and the staffing challenges. I'm wondering if whether it's the board or whether it's the district, if we can come out with a stronger stance. Maybe it's the white paper that Natalie referenced, but I haven't heard us say, and perhaps just because it's so obvious, vaccinations work. It's the right thing to do. We believe in them, and we're going to take away every barrier we can for not only our community, but specifically our student community with whom we interact all of the time. So I know you don't need more ideas. I'm sure these are out there, but tell me why we can't find those partners to get to every single high school once a month and to be handing everyone that's over 12 a sheet of paper and or collecting vaccination status. So we don't have to hand everyone, but we know we have 20%, 30%, 80% of students who are not vaccinated that are eligible. That seems like something we can do, or we can get community partners to help us with. That's going to save lives. It's going to, we could do more. I think we could. Back to the City of Medicine piece, I think we can own the fact that we've got really great contact with lots and lots of 12 through 21-year-olds, and there's an opportunity to be on the right side of that discussion. So I think that's just a statement. And then my question is around surveillance testing and vaccinations. And as Ms. Vaidar has mentioned, I'm also working for one of these larger employers in town. I'm actually running their surveillance testing operations. And we also know that community partner is incredibly well resourced. But just to be clear on what their policies are, first off, they know who's vaccinated. And if you are vaccinated, you're still getting tested once a week because they want to know about asymptomatic spread. If you're not vaccinated, you're getting tested twice a week. And that's going to be the policy, at least going through the fall and probably beyond. I haven't heard, other than the mention that we're going to be getting back in touch with those folks, how we can use the benefits of surveillance testing, of resources that are out there to help us get those kinds of things done. it's best practice. So just know that that's on my mind, is how do we come up with a policy that is like what's happening in California, just announced mandated vaccines or testing. So I would like to see us really push on that, and acknowledging that this is all changing very fast, as our administration and board members mentioned. So thanks for hearing me out, and I'm going back on mute.
Thank you, Mr. Sears. I want to give administrators a chance to respond on things that you brought up a lot of meat there. Hang on just a second.
I'm going to start with just acknowledging the sentiment of Mr. Sears. We are pretty much on the same page. As many students that are eligible 12 and up, that's our desire as well. But again, it's going to take really community effort. That's something that I need to circle back with our local health department to see what kind of data we have. The only data I heard recently was pretty much our public housing, which is not really encouraging. We are pretty much in the 10th. So if we can be able to work with our health departments to be able to have access to all the data as far as our staff are concerned, as well as our students that are 12 and up, that's something that I'm going to work with our attorney as well as the health department to see how we can get those data. But as far motivating the community, everybody to make sure that our students that are eligible to be vaccinated, again, I'm going to throw this back at the community. It's going to take faith-based community. It's going to take businesses, everybody to make sure that our numbers goes up, which is going to allow us to make sure that our schools are going to stay open. We're able to have a conversation with our North Carolina Health Department. We are opting in to be able to have those tests available for us. But again, there's still some logistic. We don't know how often that's going to be given and what are the locations that we're going to have those testing available. Again, just to remind our community, last year we were one of the few districts that we had those tests available. So it worked really well, even though there were some challenges being able to administer those testing in our schools. I think we've learned some lessons that we may be able to make some adjustment, but we are willing to do that. We're going to see what the health department that's going to make those tests available. And we're also willing to work with our health department here, Duke and other partners around the community to make those tests accessible to all our staff as well as our students. So we are pretty much on the same page. That's something that we like to have as another tool to be able to mitigate the spread of those viruses. So Dr. Hardy, anything else?
I did want to respond in reference to lunch that you mentioned in terms of outdoor seating. As we are working with our schools, we have provided guidance for them as they are developing their plans, and in partnership with Mr. Keaton and Ms. Brooks, working very closely with regard to meal planning. And there is a bullet in terms of the recommendation that explicitly says encourage the use of outdoor eating, weather permitting. So we are encouraging that, in addition to seating charts and other pieces that we mentioned in the plan, to make sure that that is an encouragement as they are looking at their entire facility to provide meal service that works with that individual school and that school community.
Raven, do you have questions and concerns?
I do. First, thank you all for putting together the presentation. We received a lot of emails, and when you read through them, you notice that there are a lot of recurring themes. And I think you all did a great job of pointing out the timeline of where we were, where we're going, where we're at, the recommendations. Some of the things that also came up is a lot of our community members referenced the toolkit. So I read through the toolkit and I matched it up against what was in the presentation. And I'll kind of start with this and right where Mr. Sears left off is the eating outside. You know, short of asking for a vote for that, that is a huge priority from my perspective. And I remember, for lack of better terms, we'll call it COVID-19, the alpha. When alpha first came around, they talked about, they did studies, especially within the exceptional children's community. And they looked at why there was sometimes what they saw was an increase in transmission in certain areas. And they started to contribute that to them actually eating together in certain areas and unmasked. And that was an area that allowed for the transmission of COVID. And I can't help but think, because I have two boys myself, so I'm also thinking as a father right now, I can't help but think how difficult it is for my youngest to not talk when he's eating. You know, like he's going to be so excited to see all these kids in school. He's going to want to talk, Star Wars, everything else like that. I can't get him to not talk while he's eating, and I have to constantly remind him. So I can only imagine a teacher having to do that with 18 other students. That can be difficult. So if nothing else, you know, asking for a tent, because you know, our principals and the staff, there are things that they may want. And I think it's also incumbent upon us to kind of push this a little bit more and at least ask for tents outside, because I understand that we want to make sure that they have the flexibility to adjust. And if there are, you know, if there are 300 students that are going to lunch at the same time, I know our high schools have over 1,000 people in them, and a lot of times they would have 3 different periods. But if we have 300 students that are going to lunch at one time and they're in the cafeteria, if we actually had an outside area, we're not requiring that all of them eat outside, but maybe we can have, you know, 100 outside, 200 inside, and it gives some additional feet from social distancing that we can have in place. So that was really the one thing that was at the top of my list of things that I saw, and it just kind of stuck out because the toolkit specifically spoke about that. Some of the other things that I just want to bring up is really questions that, again, they were recurring questions, and you all have done a great job of addressing most of them, dealing with the routine viral testing, the surveillance testing, the screening testing, the 10 days versus the 14 days. You all addressed it, the COVID dashboard, that was going to be up and running as of August 16th. So August 16th. There was also a question on, for consistency purposes, and Mr. Sears already touched on it, about, and this may vary when we're talking about elementary schools compared to high schools, but when these students are out, them being able to access what's being taught. You know, I know extracurricular, like the band class and chorus class, that's a whole different world, but just that, at least the core classes, to make sure that instruction is still being able to be provided to them is definitely a fundamental need that they'll need to have in place. And that actually had me thinking about other things. And I think someone that made a comment earlier also mentioned this as well. And it was dealing with the meals. And I remember last year, we made sure that we had meals available for a lot of the students that were at home and the families that were at home. If we have a class that for whatever reason is quarantined, will there be, is it already something that can be put into place, or is there something that will be in place that will allow these families to be able to pick up lunch, you know, on a day-to-day basis? Is that something that?
So and it was under the summer feeding program was the name of it, that got extended to, that gave us the ability to do non-congregate set-in meals before, which is what we delivered out to the community. That has sunsetted, it expired already. So we do not have the ability to go out and, not using federal funds, not using school nutrition food like we did before. So that is not an option that's available to us.
All right, thank you. The other things that I did have questions about, and I didn't see anything about this in the presentation. Doesn't mean that it's not important, but if there are any changes, I would love to hear about this. Also, with our exceptional children's program, have there been any changes, or are there any new processes that will be in place in this year? Because we have a whole new line of parents coming into schools, and there's, we have the shields that we make available to our educators, to face masks. I know we do have the ability to have medical waivers for some people that are unable to wear masks, but is there anything that's new, that's going to be newly implemented, that's going to be taking place within our exceptional children's program as it pertains to just, the three Ws?
We do have Dr. Bell here. What I will say is she can come up if she would like to speak to that question. I did make, I think on the face covering slide, as you mentioned, our accommodations process, and that will definitely also be shared in the toolkit and information that Mr. Sutterth will be sharing with our families on the Back to School website, so that families are aware of the face covering accommodation and how to make sure some of those families will have students that are served through our Students with Disabilities. We may have other students that may have other medical needs where they need to apply for our face covering accommodation, and making sure that they follow through that particular process and that we can support our families in that. Dr. Bell said she has nothing additional to add. Thank you, Dr. Bell.
And I think this is probably about my last question. We kind of mentioned about essentially deployment sites for vaccines. I know that it is expected that vaccines will more than likely be made available for 5 to 12-year-olds near the end of the calendar year. And I'm thinking about our community. I'm thinking about sometimes the lack of mobility for some of our families, and the timeframes of which maybe they're not able to get to their own medical provider or to the Health and Human Services building. Do you foresee, and this isn't like, etched in stone, but do you foresee us having the ability to possibly having vaccination sites move around throughout the district, especially when we're looking at being able to get our parents and our students in one place in order to make sure that that vaccine is made available to them? Because I'm looking at our rate for our 12 and up, and I know we're in a 20 to 30% range. And I'm just wondering if we put that extra effort towards focusing on the 5 to 12 beforehand to be able to have something in place, I'm just hoping that that can help as well.
I just agree with you. We're going to be as flexible as possible. We really want to be in person. Whatever effort as far as facilities are concerned, to be able to open them, to make this vaccine accessible to our students, that's what we'll do.
Thank you. I don't have any questions, but again, when I look through the presentation, I think that you all did a great job of just letting us know where we're at. You provided us with the recommendations and the reason behind that. And I know that that won't end all the questions, but at least gives people a little bit of known in a world with so many unknowns right now. So thank you again.
Thank you, Mr. Raven. I see other questions popping up, and I want to get to y'all's, and I want to see what my laundry list of questions. So if y'all have stuff that was just related to what Mr. Raven was talking about and follows, can you bring that? And then
Well, just gratitude for the bell covers with the instruments. Definitely a big game changer. You think about our musical instruments and just having all that. My question is, who provides that? Do parents have to provide that? The schools are going to figure it out, or we are going to provide it?
We have already procured those, and they are at, Mr. Tucker is making sure they'll be distributed at our schools.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you so much for that.
Ms. Sunstead,
It's sort of related, but I'll make it quick.
take all the time you need.
We were talking about vaccinations, and I think if we can make sure that that information, because they are accessible in our community, is available on our website. So on that Back to School page, if we can make sure that there's a link to where you can get your COVID vaccines. There's walk-in clinics across the Durham right now. The Public Health Department is having an event on August 20th. It's a Friday from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. where they'll be giving out vaccines and gift cards and lots of other really great free items. But if we can make sure on that Back to School page, there's links there for families, that'd be great. And Chip, since you're there, I'm gonna add one more thing. On the Q&A, we didn't talk about when a person tests positive, what happens next. And a couple of people part that up in public comments. So if that can be too included in that Q&A, someone that's tested positive, what happens next? Be helpful.
Will do. We do have that information. And we can provide a link to the Durham County Department of Public Health has a fantastic, well-organized resource on sites where vaccines are available, et cetera. So rather than try to reinvent that wheel, we'll make sure that we make that link prominent.
Thank you so much. I was glad to see Dr. Mavinga coming back in because I don't want him to have to watch the replay. Thank you all, staff, for everything that you've done to put together the best cohesive plan that you could. I will say, I don't know if anybody else had this experience, but that day I got my vaccination, I cried happy tears, because that is the way out of this and that is the way forward. So we know that we have huge inequities still, even in Durham, with vaccine uptake, whatever we call that. I'm looking at my nurses, what do we call that? And we know that it racially is not where we need it to be in the Latinx community and the Black community. And we know that our students are 82% students of color. So it is hugely imperative to me that we do everything we can, because we're entrusted with children that are not yet able to be vaccinated. So yes, face mask, easy peasy. But beyond that, when can we incentivize our staff to show proof of vaccination and to celebrate that? So I've seen some employers giving free comp time, vacation time. Durham County right now, if you haven't gotten vaccinated, you can go get a $100 gift card. If you drive someone and you're 18 and over, you can get a $25 gift card. Our health department is looking for what they can do for students that are in that 12 to 18 window to incentivize that group as well. But the meeting I was on yesterday, the health department said our vaccination rate in that population, the 12 to 18-year-olds, is about 38%. Does that sound right? Totally vaccinated, 38%. That's a start, but that's not where we need it to be. And so I want us to do everything we can, all hands on deck, to just move it, and keep each other safe. We know Delta is different, and I think that's what so many of our commenters have said. So I join the chorus of folks that are saying, as much as possible, lunch outside and let our principals tell you what they need, or in the classroom. Like, we don't need mass groupings of hundreds of students in a cafeteria. That, frankly, being in this room with you all is making me a little nervous. I mean, but this is where we are, right? I'm nervous about field trips, really. I would be more cautious. Like, we haven't done busing students, lots and lots of students on school buses, to see how that plays out over the start of the school year, right? We had summer busing, but full buses with Delta, we haven't done. So that alone is a new tight exposure kind of thing. I would love some capacity on indoor athletics, but you know how I feel about that. Like, if we're bringing people together, let's limit some of those numbers, especially while the community builds vaccination rates. And I don't know, what's the latest percentage on adult vaccination? Are we near 60%? 58%. And we also have 56%. We just dropped a bit. So whatever we can do, like, as employers, I think the city should look at what it takes to mandate. I think the county should. We've got to come together, and the military is about to do it, right? It's not, I heard an NPR story today, they called it their body armor, right? They're thinking of it as how you protect yourself and your people. So I look forward to those conversations, and when we can lead the state and the nation in that progressive policy. I think one thing that I'm squeamish about, and I want us to have volunteers in, but it feels irresponsible of us to let unvaccinated volunteers in, because we know they can spread, people can transmit asymptomatically. So I don't know why we would take the risk of unvaccinated volunteers at this point, as we're just starting school. Can y'all help me understand? And I know we have equity issues and we want to be welcome and opening, but we're not doing school in the same way. We're doing it very, very conservatively health-wise. So is that something we could consider, just looking towards vaccinated volunteers rather than wide open?
Let me start off by responding to Ms. Byers' concerns. I'm a strong supporter of incentivizing our students as well as our staff to be vaccinated. Those are really things that we all need to really be able to brainstorm to see what are the best ideas. And also I'm going to invite our community really to be able to support us in this endeavor. And especially I like to say this about our faith-based community as well, because they have a lot of our students that they attend the facilities as well. If we can all work collaboratively to see how we can be able to incentivize our students, that will go a long way. As far as volunteers are concerned, I think we're grappling with this because when we talk about volunteer, we're talking sometimes about our vendors, the folks that come to our building doing professional development and all that kind of stuff. So that's where we're grappling with, say, we have all these learning materials and those volunteers, they have to come and conduct PDs and so forth. Should we require them to have those vaccination cards? So that's what we're really struggling with, but I'm gonna let Dr. Hardy make some few more comments, but again, I'm gonna follow your pleasure, but I just wanted to say this. My position was pretty much not to let volunteers in our buildings, but once I started hearing about all these vendors and folks that can come and help us with PD and other things, that's made it really kind of complicated. But are we at a position where we can require them to have those vaccination cards? But if they say no, are we going to be able to continue with those professional development and not? So that's what's kind of the struggle. That's where we're on the fence with that. That's all.
Ditto to what Dr. Rabinga said. I think the only piece that I would add is that making sure that our students have access to some of those services in school, especially some of the social and emotional services, co-located mental health. So that is some of our thinking, and knowing that many times many of our youngsters may not have access to those services outside of the school, and making sure that we're supporting them to the best extent possible. These are our recommendations, and we definitely yield to your decision in terms of where you land, and we will be more than happy to carry that out once you ultimately make that decision.
Ms. Simpson.
I think clarifying that is helpful. And I'm going to make an assumption that y'all aren't saying we're opening the doors for everyone and anyone to come volunteer. And we're going to be slow and thoughtful about what this looks like. I'm assuming schools are going to do a lot of that work. So, we do have a lot of folks who are entering our building to support students and to support staff, but it doesn't sound like we're saying, everyone come volunteer. Is that correct?
Absolutely. So it is specific to, you are providing a service to either a student or group of students or to staff. So you are providing, and the reason I didn't want to name is we have so many partners. I'm looking at Ms. Giovanni and our MOUs, because I know if I start naming, I'm going to leave someone out. But we have so many organizations that have partnered, and they have only provided support to our youngsters through virtual environment. And this will give them the opportunity to provide support either for an academic need or for social and emotional need. And specifically our co-located mental health, those services have only been provided virtually. So this will now allow those partners to come into the school to provide support if Nakia was able to get that service. And for professional learning, as Dr. Rabinga, this would allow for all of the resources that our board has supported us in implementation to support our teachers in implementation of those particular resources. So you have to be providing a specific support to either a student or an adult to have access to our building.
I would like also to comment regarding field trip. There are some programs that really require students to have those hours to be other places to be able to require those experiences as well. But we're going to be very conservative approving those field trips, but we really want to make sure that those field trips are the one really aligned with what students really need to have in order to have their credit.
I appreciate it. And I think that I'm so glad to hear about surveillance testing. I know y'all are still working on that, but getting that up and going and having that part of our regular rhythm for volunteers. So if volunteers weren't able to be vaccinated for whatever their own health reason was, they could go get surveillance screened before they came in. You know, I think of what is best practice in the universities around us, and I think our practices should try as much as possible to match that. And I'm glad we have the state level of support for that surveillance testing. Are there other thoughts and questions that come to board members as we continue to?
I'll just echo the outdoor guidance. That seems like a thing that majority of us do feel, you know, if outdoor can be the standard and we spread indoor to outdoor, but I think that feels really important. And I do think community is ready to support schools. So if schools need tents or other items to make this work, I know there are folks who are out there like, what can we do to help? One last question to mask. Will we have masks available for students? I know some people have asked, do the students need that for their, I mean, I know parents can provide their own back to school, but will we also have masks available for kids?
We absolutely have masks available for kids and staff.
Are they high quality, Dr. Monk? Like,
We
Yeah, 'cause
we
we-
have KN95 masks as well as surgical masks and cloth masks.
do we have KN95 kid masks?
We do.
Student masks?
No, we just have KN5 for adults, but we do have kid-sized masks, so they don't have masks that are
Yeah.
flopping off of the noses and things like that.
We talked about music, but did we talk about singing? And did we say, you can put a bell cover on an instrument. What are we doing for our vocal students as y'all think about that?
They're also special, and I think Mr. Tucker is in the hallway or he may be behind me, but we also have special face coverings for our chorus classrooms as well. I know they're around. Dr. Stewart's going to check for me. If I've missed anything, we can have Mr. Tucker speak to that. But we wanted to make sure that we had those, the appropriate PPE for those programs when we returned in the spring.
Wonderful. Mr. Lee.
As we, I guess, as we move on, I understand the sentiment of, you know, the outside idea for lunch. I understand that, and I can support that. I just want to make sure that, you know, everyone understands that not every child wants to be outside in the cold eating lunch. Not every child wants to be outside in the rain or the heat. Today was hot. And I know that my children, I have 3, I have a high schooler, which is still hard to say. He just started, you know, he's starting, and 2 5th graders. And I know that they would be miserable in that heat trying to eat, even if it's on an overhang. You know, it gets hot and it gets cold here too. I know some people from the north don't believe that this is cold here, but it gets cold. And that can be very uncomfortable. Now, I want to make sure that, you know, I just want to make the voice known that not everybody would be comfortable, you know, having lunch period outside with a full coat on and it's freezing and you're trying to eat. I want to make sure that we're making accommodations for that as well, because I know my 3 would be challenged sometimes in some types of weather.
Just want to respond to Mr. Lee as well as Ms. Armstead. We heard you, the sentiment of the board. But again, we're going to work with our principals and give them that leverage to be able to talk with teachers and our students when it's appropriate to be able to take those students outside as well. So we're going to use indoor as well as outdoor as appropriately possible.
Yes, thank you. I see Mr. Tucker joining us to tell us about all things arts and singing.
Yeah, so the question was about masks for singing. So current recommendation is to use regular face coverings, just as you would for any indoor activity.
And also probably they could go outside some, I mean.
Yes,
yeah,
ma'am.
Yeah, I know that at my church, that's the thing that makes us most nervous about gathering in groups is actually singing and all the aerosols, let's say. Thank you. So much work gone into this, so much that you all are being nimble about and being responsive to. Can you speak real quickly, and this will be probably my last thing? The notion of temperature screening last year provided us some sense of security. And I think it's concerning to some folks that we're doing away with that and having people screen their children at home. Can you talk about how you made that decision and whether we actually found any COVID cases through temperature screening, that kind of thing?
Thank you. I'm gonna start off, then one of our staff members here will be able to finish with this. So if we recall, last year with Plan B, we probably had only about 30% of our students coming on campus. It was taking a really long time for parents, to drop their kids and go through that process. If we're gonna have about 90% of our students coming on campus, it may take us a good 4 hours before we can screen everybody. So that was one of the rationale we came up with, is to say, if we really want to have schools, it's going to be almost impossible to screen everybody. And it's going to take a long time, good 3 hours. I don't want to exaggerate. It's going to be really hard to have a school.
We have Nurse Howard and Nurse Thompson, if they can speak to some of the recommendations that we see in the toolkit with regards to screening for staff. I meant students, I apologize.
So the current recommendation by, in the Strong Schools Toolkit, always gets tongue-tied saying that, is that students do not need to be screened at this time. And I think that's all based on research that guided that and how many cases they were catching when we were screening in such large numbers. So they've done away with student screenings, but still recommend screening for staff.
Did you, sorry, Nurse Howard, did temperature screenings catch COVID? Like, did they, I mean, I think there was some hope that they would, kind of like we had a lot of hope with cleaning things all the time prevented COVID.
So the temperature screening there's a lot of debates around that when we were screening. I think I read that it wasn't actually, there weren't a lot of COVID cases that were even febrile. So as they looked at that data to say, are we doing this with such resource extensive thing on our school district, if it's worth it? And it wasn't necessarily, the data shows that it wasn't necessarily capturing because a lot of people weren't febrile at the time. So I guess that's the answer to your question.
I think it is, and I think it's going to, maybe you can encourage our folks that, and we'll keep encouraging them, that we really need to keep the sick kids home, and the parents' intuition and the families knowing how their kids are feeling and acting kind of gives us.
So I think that would be my message to our parents, is that they know their children best. So when your child is just not right, even the symptoms that are listed in the Strong Schools Toolkit, what we've seen is that the symptoms are so varied. It's from nothing to everything. Had one student was just not feeling well, fatigued. And so a lot of questions, a lot of parents called about between March and June about recommendation to get tested when they just weren't feeling right. And luckily we had a lot of pediatricians that supported that, understanding that that's really where we're going to catch that, is to suggest the testing. And then the testing that we did have available did help, where we were able to send parents straight to a test site.
Thank you. And you did make me think of one more question, Nurse Howard. Where are we with nurses? Are we still looking for some? Do you have some help? I mean, how are we doing?
So there's a nursing shortage almost. I think in every sector right now, they're actively recruiting. So we're struggling to get good nurses in because there are challenges such as huge sign-on bonus at big organizations that I'm hearing. And so I think the health department is also facing the same thing. So it's an ongoing process. I will say, if you know of a nurse who's interested, send them our way.
And I think that hopefully some of our community members will hear that. I think being a school nurse and working the same hours as your children is an amazing gift at a certain time of life for people. And I hope that, I know we're paying competitively, and that would be wonderful, because we so appreciate you and all your leadership through this. You've been amazing.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, discussion? This is here for action. I'm not sure in what format you needed us to make action. Yeah, Ms. Valladares, are you raising your hand? No.
And I could give it a try, and then you can tell me if it's, but I mean, at this point, I move approval of the title of the presentation was precautions code.
Back to school 2021-22, or you can move to approve all the recommendations from staff in the presentation.
I move to approve all the recommendations from the staff in the presentation.
Second.
My discussion from Ms. Stagner would be, did we make any changes? Because I don't feel like we quite left it as it was. We had a lot of, we were tweaking as we went. Or was there anything?
I think that if there are specific additional recommendations, that they should be articulated as part of the motion, because I heard a lot of discussion about it, but no, other than maybe the outside should be more strongly recommended. It's not clear that that's captured in the motion.
Let me make a comment as well before you guys make a final decision here. This is pretty much a moving target, as you all know. Things will change tomorrow, a week, a month from now. And we're always open to come to you, or you nudging us and say, bring this for conversation. So this is not final, as we're still dealing with this pandemic. So we need your support as we're presenting this the best plan possible, so we can open up our school in 2 weeks.
I will add that in the presentation, something that I did note, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that there's a lot of leadership at the sites. So a lot of the parents are engaging us about district-wide policies where, whether it's outdoor eating, whether it's spacing, all that, every school is different. So I do urge our community, make sure you have good communication with your admins, with your administrators. You're the best point of contact. If there's anything in terms of district-wide, like we are, we do have policies in place. But there's going to be a lot of communication, engagement. I think the volunteers, all that we discussed, is going to vary from site to site.
So the biggest one that I heard significant conversation about that I think is different, if you all actually have toolkit ready to go out, is the one about outdoor eating. And like the blue slide says, our recommendation is to reinstate the use of the cafeteria to serve and eat meals. It doesn't have anything, I mean, it just says we're going to be in the cafeteria sitting 3 feet apart facing, I heard significant conversation on that one alone that I thought what we were in consensus on. Some more encouragement of other alternatives like outdoors and in classrooms. I mean, is there?
I'm not sure if they can pull back up the presentation to go through that particular recommendation. I'm happy to read all of the block if that's appropriate. Yep. Thank you so much. Perfect. So keep going back.
Dr. Hardy, modifying that block to say like modify layouts indoors and outdoors or something like that will be enough to get that recommendation to where we want it to be. Because in this recommendation, it speaks to indoor eating, whether that be in your classroom or in the cafeteria. So just adding outdoor spaces, I think would help.
Absolutely. And there is I think it's the second to last sentence. And Dr. Monk spoke to this, using seating charts to assist and encourage the use of outdoor space, weather permitting.
I think we're looking for maybe like a little bit more earlier in the recommendation.
Yeah, I think it's because it leads with the cafeteria. It's like, woo, we're in the cafeteria, the way I read it. And so we have a motion. The second. Did we-
Just to clarify, Natalie, so since they do have the wording, but it's towards the end, is there any way to just move it up? We're not amending anything. So in this case, it wouldn't be an amended. It would just be a matter of just shifting the way it's presented because, you know, it's second to last about outdoor. Can we continue with the motion as is, or do we go for an amended?
Probably just to be safe, it'll be amended.
If there's no objection, the motion can be amended by the person who made it and to more of a clarification, I think, of the motion. So I don't think you need to go through the whole procedure of having an amendment.
And Dr. Monk may want to add to this, our part of the rationale for that first sentence was, as he spoke previous in Plan B, we could not use any of the congregate settings at all. So there were no other options. So you only could be in the classroom or outside. So this was giving schools more flexibility to have more space. So you can use your classroom, you can use outdoor, and you can use the cafeteria. So you have more flexibility to make sure that as you're planning your meal service, students are as spaced as possible. And Dr. Monk may want to add to that as well.
Yeah, I'll just say the way that I read it right now, even though it's by the bottom, it does say that it encourages use of outdoor space, weather permitting. Not all of the facilities can facilitate that yet. That's something that I'm sure that's going to be worked on. And since we are going to continue to adapt, I think we've made our preference clear, and we'll be able to move forward with that as is. But I'm comfortable with it.
Yeah, what I want us to do is commit that this board will get, if principals need resources to make it possible, so that Mr. Lee's children are in the shade or out of the rain, that we can actually because we all wanted outdoor learning spaces to be constructed, and we can't magically do that, but we're trying, we're working through the fall, right? But I just want us to be clear as a board that we're committed to that, whether it needs a motion or not, Ms. Sagner.
I do want to add, DPS Foundation had mini grants that were given to the schools, and one of the biggest uses, the vast majority of all those grants went towards schools that wanted outdoor, like tents or any outdoor outfitting. So that is very telling that, that a lot of those requests actually went for outdoor. And thanks for DPS Foundation, other organizations that want to support us on that, we need support. So, and thank you, Dr. Julius Monk, for all the work you're all doing for our schools. So can we proceed with the motion as is? I think it's been seconded.
I think so. And is there any further discussion on this item? If not, I'll do a roll call vote, and don't let me forget Mr. Sears. Ms. Umstead,
Aye.
Mr. Lee,
Aye.
Mr. Raven,
Aye.
Ms. Valladares,
Aye.
Mr. Sears.
This is Matt Sears. I vote aye.
Thank you. And I'm Natalie Byer. I guess I vote aye as well. Thank you all for your work on that, and that will move us on. Thank you for your patience. We are moving to the redistricting of school board election districts from one fun thing to another. Thank you all for being here, staff. We have cleared out the room. Thank you for your patience while people are freeing up space. Chairs available if anybody's really interested in redistricting. All right, Ms. Giovanni.
Thank you. Good evening, board members, Dr. Mubanga, colleagues, and Durham community. Before we're here, I'm pleased to introduce to the board today Ms. Deborah Stagner. Just by way of introduction, Ms. Stagner is a partner of Mr. Ken Sue, who is the board's attorney and is a partner at Tharrington Smith. She is here as the board attorney in lieu of Ken Sue. So I am introducing this, and then she's going to come up to the podium as we shift into the presentation. This service is outside of the regular board attorney work. There are several lawyers, I mean, maybe about 7 attorneys across the state that specialize in this redistricting. It is legally required every 10 years once the census numbers come out. We are, and Ms. Stagner will explain this in further detail, but given the delay in the census numbers, generally they come out in May. They, I believe, may have come out yesterday or maybe even earlier today. The preliminary legacy numbers, I believe they're called. And I'm not an expert in this. Again, there are only 7 lawyers in North Carolina that are, and we are fortunate to have Ms. Stagner here with us. So we are here for action. As I indicated, we are on a shortened timeline. We have to have these maps. The board has to have these maps finalized before the submission of people to get elected in December, and then the elections are in March. So typically there would be, we could have a little more time to have these conversations, but it is before you on action. And once she presents, I am happy to further discuss any payments. Given that she is Mr. Sue's attorney, I will be working with Mr. Sue and Ms. Stagner regarding any charges. The maximum fee would be $17,500, which is shared on the proceeds with you. But Ms. Stagner will explain the 2 options for the service fee. Thank you. Ms. Stagner.
Thank you very much. I'm not a stranger to some of you, but first time seeing some of the other board members. So it's a pleasure to be here. It's been a while since I've been in Durham. So I'm going to ask whoever is magically in charge of the slideshow to just pull up my slides, and I appreciate that. Oh, okay, they're here. So I may pull it up on my screen too, just so I can see what I'm looking at. All right. So what is redistricting? And Ms. Giovanni did a good job of sort of introducing that. And I'm here tonight with Blake Esselstein, who is a demographer, and he will be coming on to do this presentation with me. Redistricting is just the regular process of adjusting the lines of your voting districts in accordance with population shifts. And for entities that use true election districts, this means redrawing those district lines every time there is a change in population, if it's puts those districts out of balance once the census numbers come in. And as Tanya said, we have census numbers today. And so Blake has been very vigorously looking at those this afternoon so that he can join us tonight and show and give you some actual numbers. We did not expect it to have those numbers until next week. They came out a little bit early. So I'm very pleased to have Blake here to talk about those. Next slide, please. So Ms. Giovanni mentioned the 7 lawyers. There may be some more than that around the state that do redistricting, but there are a group of lawyers that have come together under the auspices of the North Carolinians for Redistricting Reform to provide local redistricting service, and that's a nonpartisan redistricting expertise for those local governments that want to have and commit to having an open process and a nonpartisan process. We're not going to use any election data. We're not going to use any party data, and these will all be conducted in open meetings. So while if the board wants to go forward to have Blake and I do your redistricting, you will be contracting with Tharrington Smith. It will just be an engagement to do the redistricting. We would And I have done the board's redistricting in the past. I was here 10 years ago to work with the board on redistricting. My partner, Michael Kroll, and I worked with you 20 years ago. I've been around for a while, so we're familiar with the district, but in the past, we have drawn the maps ourselves in-house. This year, we are working, this time around, working with a professional demographer who is just a genius with maps, and I think you'll be really impressed with him. We would be providing the legal advice and having Blake consult and draw the map. So next slide, please. All right, so who needs to redistrict? These are just the topics we're going to cover, the demographic changes, some legal considerations, an overview of the process, and then a timeline. There isn't a separate slide for timeline because we sort of got thrown through a loop, but Blake is going to talk about that. So next slide, please. Why redistrict? There are about 36 boards of education in North Carolina that are subject to redistricting because they have at least some members elected by district. Also cities and counties across the state. Durham Public Schools Board of Education is one of those school districts that has to redraw your election lines because you have true election districts. You have 6 true election districts. One is an at-large to make up the 7 members. So you have 4 single districts, 2 combined districts, and then the 1 at large. And as you know, only voters who reside in those districts may vote for the board member from that district. And so do you need to redistrict? Yes, because you have true election districts. If the population of those current election districts that we drew 10 years ago have come outside of the permissible range. So the constitutional principle that's at issue is 1 person, 1 vote. That doesn't apply to purely residency districts or those where you just have to live there, but as I said, in true electoral districts. And that requires them to be apportioned so that they're of substantially equal weight. It doesn't have to be precise down to the person for local government, but it is required to be substantially equal. Regular apportionment of those districts is required so they don't become so out of balance that that principle is violated. And in my notes, I said the board will not know for certain until later this month, but we will know tonight. So I'm going to turn that, if you'll go to the next slide, turn it over to Blake to talk a little bit about the maps. Blake, are you on there?
I am. Can people hear me?
You can, yes, thank you.
Okay, so good to be here. Thank you, Deborah, for all the introductory information. And today is an exciting day. I'm glad that someone else there, I heard this topic being introduced as fun. I'm not sure if that was sarcasm, but to me, this is an exciting time. As Deborah mentioned, the data were originally anticipated to be delivered on Monday, but they moved it 4 days earlier. So I have had the pleasure of spending a bunch of time this afternoon with the data, and sort of like you all were having to adjust in the previous topic, because after the documents had been provided, things were shifting. Deborah provided some slides like the one you're looking at right now. I assume it's on, I'm seeing a screen looking at the whole state and sort of a perspective map. But I have some slides that have supplanted these, because the best we had last week when Deborah was putting slides together was estimates, but now we've actually got the data. So I'm going to share my screen. And I'm getting a prompt saying this will stop someone else's screen sharing. I trust that's okay. And it is not giving me the option to share just a window, but I will share my whole screen and then make sure that I'm going to move this elsewhere. So, and by the way, I'm happy to share these slides after the fact. I've literally been working on them up until a few minutes ago, but please let me know if there are any issues with the visuals. So instead of that map showing North Carolina with the estimates, this is my next slide here is looking at excuse me for one moment, the Zoom piece is obscuring my controls. There we go. So this is an excerpt. I realize it's a little bit blurry. It's a clip from a larger image showing the whole country, but this is showing percent change. Again, these data are new as of 1 o'clock this afternoon. You can see North Carolina. And let me change my pointer here too. So North Carolina is here. And basically the orange is indicating a loss of population, and the yellows and green shades, the darker, indicate a increase in population. So Durham County is right here. This was a surprise to me. More than half of North Carolina counties lost population. This is even though the state's population increased by 900 some thousand. The majority of North Carolina counties lost population. So that's all the orange you see here. But the dark green is Chatham County, Wake County, Johnston County, and Durham County. And Durham was actually the 5th fastest growing county by percentage. It's faster than Mecklenburg. And that the current total population that was announced today is 324,833. And what this slide is showing is that, you know, population change is not distributed equally. It's not distributed equally around the state, and it's not distributed equally in Durham County. So this is a draft. There are a couple things I would tweak before making sort of this a final representation, but I just wanted to give an idea. Again, here, the darker greens represent a larger increase. The numbers, if folks can read the numbers in each of these are precincts. These are basically voting precincts. The numbers indicate the extent of increase or decrease, and the yellow means a change of less than 100. I do want to point out that these orange ones here are a situation where a precinct was split. So these orange ones do not necessarily have loss. They're showing as loss, but that's because I won't go into the weeds. But anyway, this is just a draft to give you an idea that the changes in population were not evenly distributed around the county of Durham either. And I do like the occasional perspective map. Our human eyes are sometimes better at distinguishing quantities as size rather than color. So here's just another way of showing that the population changes are not evenly distributed. Deborah had a slide showing the current districts, and this is just another representation of that. I trust that you all are familiar, but this is a map that I created in evaluating the current districts and what their population is based on the 2020 population. Deborah, I've got another slide I can go to showing the answer to the question and the statistics for the various districts and their population, but would you like to kind of introduce that topic and the plus or minus 5% before I do?
Absolutely. Thank you. So we talked about substantial equality, and as I said, it doesn't have to be, unlike some other on the national level, exact, but in the context of local legislative redistricting, there can be a deviation from that perfect population equality to accommodate traditional objectives of drawing districts. And when we talk about substantial equality, when we talk about the ideal size, we take the total population and you divide it by 4. And so each of those 4 districts needs to be a certain, you know, if it was ideal, it would be 324,000 whatever divided by 4. But the traditional rule of thumb is that each of the districts should be within plus or minus 5% of the ideal size. So if the population deviation of each district falls within that 5% rule, the district map is presumptively constitutional. It complies with one person, one vote. So that's leading into Blake's analysis of the current districts based on the new population data.
Perfect, thank you. And so this is just a screenshot from the software that I was using, and basically the green means that a district is within the limits that Deborah described, and if it's not green, that means it is outside. So you can see here, excuse me, the District 1A has a deviation of 2.35, so that's less than 5%. And 3B is also within the plus or minus 5%, but 2A is lower than 5% below, and 4B is higher than 5%. Again, I like to see these things sometimes visually. So the ideal population also is here, as Deborah said. She predicted that well, 81,000. And this is just to get your bearings, and the colors will match on the chart that I have here. So you can see that the green and the yellow bars fall close. So the dashed line is the lower threshold and the dotted line is the upper threshold. You can see on the map that districts 2A and 4B are next to each other. So there may be some opportunities for, well, we can talk about the approach that we can use a little bit later. But this is just another way of showing that the districts aren't too wildly far apart, especially for a county that had 21% population growth. I was surprised that they were as close as they were, but there will need to be adjustments. And I think I can stop sharing my screen here and we can go back to Deborah's slides. And it would be the slide after, slide 8 there, I think would be a good place to start. Thank you.
Great. So, okay. So again, this is just setting out the 5% plus or minus rule. Next slide, please. So who's responsible for redistricting? And as school board members, you are, it's your decision. The new map does not have to be approved by voters or by county commissioners or anyone else. In some cases, there might be a local act or a court order that provides how the election districts are to be revised, and that would control over the general statute. But in the case of Durham Public Schools, there's no such local act. So this board will determine its own new boundaries and adopt a resolution for doing so. Next slide, please. And this is the legal authority. North Carolina General Statute 115C-37.1 authorizes local boards of education to draw new election districts after each federal census if needed to comply with one person, one vote. Next slide, please. So are there rules about how to draw new districts? And as I've said, the primary rule is that each district must be substantially equal in population. But aside from that, are there things that the board must consider and must not consider? Well, electoral districts must not be drawn to dilute racial minority voting strength. And so there's a slide about race and redistricting because that often comes up as a question. The US Constitution prohibits drawing election districts for the purpose of discriminating against any minority group. And Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, the Federal Voting Rights Act, prohibits any election method that has the effect of denying minority voters an equal opportunity to elect candidates of their choice. So race cannot be a predominant or primary factor in drawing election districts unless those districts were originally drawn subject to a federal court order or a consent decree in a voting rights case, or unless there is a compelling governmental interest such as compliance with the Voting Rights Act. And so, you know, in my slide, I say what's predominant. The race of the voters would better explain the boundary of a district than traditional redistricting criteria. So these are the tests that a court would look at should there be a challenge under Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. For your purposes, you will want to remember that you should not be adopting maps that are intentionally drawn to disadvantage any minority group. So we'll go to the next slide. The board will have some input other than those hard and fast parameters about, you know, making sure that the population is substantially equal within that plus or minus 5%. You have some input on what other priorities you want to place on drawing those maps. So a very common one is that electoral districts should be composed of territory within a continuous boundary. You don't want to have satellite areas. You want to have I think this is a very common and in some cases required by law. I think the school board statutes specifically say that, but it's certainly strongly encouraged. You would consider whether you want to have some consideration of municipal, precinct, township, or other administrative boundaries, and preserving those boundaries or dividing them in as few of areas as possible. And I'll just mention that in the past 2 redistricting cycles that we have worked with the Board of Education, we've been able to draw the districts so that the board's election districts did not split any voting precincts. We used whole voting precincts, and that's not always possible, but it has been in the past. And if that's a priority of the board, we can look at that again. Keeping communities of interest together. Are there neighborhoods that it doesn't make sense to split them up because they're a cohesive area, traditionally kept together, voted together? Physical features, rivers, major roads, are those things that you want to be considered? Is compactness important? So how important is it to try to keep the shape of the current districts as much as possible? So I'll go to the next slide, please. And this is just one of my maps, much more crude than Blake's lovely maps, but this shows just from the Durham County government site, shows municipalities, major roads, and voting precincts. So those are some of the factors you might want to consider. Next slide, please. So again, some additional criteria: preserving the core of of existing districts. Compactness, do you want to avoid having that ink blot kind of shape? You may want to respect incumbency, which is a legitimate redistricting principle. It's certainly something that you can ask the map drawer to take into account. You may want to plan for expected areas of growth in the county in the upcoming 10 years. So if you can sort of anticipate where that growth might take place, you could request that one of the things to keep in mind is to maybe underpopulate that district a little bit, still within the plus or minus 5%, but to hopefully compensate for some of the future growth in the next decade. And then, because you all are school board members, some school boards want to consider which schools are in each district, or making sure that a particular school is in a particular district. I understand very well that you all represent all students and all constituents in the county, but if that's something that's important, we can plot those schools on the map and at least you will know where they are. And then, as I said at the beginning, we're not going to take into account any partisan considerations. Next slide. So here we're going to talk about the process, and the process, as we've mentioned before, is compressed this year. Normally, I would have been here in March talking to you about redistricting, but we knew that because of the unusual year it's been, that we would be waiting until the fall to get the numbers. Unfortunately, we have them a little bit ahead of time, but the first 2 steps are to determine whether you need to redistrict, and I think that's been shown tonight, and to adopt some guidelines to follow. And these steps can be done in any order, but because of that timeline, I would encourage the board to think about the redistricting criteria. If you want to go ahead and give instruction to us tonight, that's fine. If you want to wait, digest it a little bit, come back at a subsequent meeting, that's fine as well. But Blake will talk about the timeline a little bit later, but it is important to make sure that the maps are drawn in time to be ready before filing for the next election. And ideally, enough in advance of that to give the Board of Elections time to process the maps and let the voters know and let the potential candidates know. So the next step would be to take those criteria, those guidelines, those guiding principles, and develop one or more redistricting plans. And if the board decides to delegate the initial drawing of those redistricting plans to Blake and I as your consultants, the final plan would still be adopted by the full board. All actions taken by the board concerning redistricting are public and will be taken in public meetings. The board might want to get public input or hold a public hearing, more than one public hearing on any proposed redistricting plans for a school board. That is not required by law, but it's certainly encouraged. And to get, to have those plans out there, whether they're posted on your website, et cetera, to make sure that the public has a chance to see them, weigh in on them. And again, perhaps hold a public hearing. And then those lines would be adopted by resolution. You may want to, once you've had them out there for some public comment, make some adjustments, give some direction to Blake to redraw some areas or take other things into account. But then the board would adopt a resolution, and a copy of that resolution sent to the County Board of Elections, which notifies residents of the change if there's any. And so Blake, I'm going to turn it back over to you now for the timeline to talk about that a little bit if you'd like. Blake, can you?
And can folks see my screen?
Now we can, yes.
Okay, good. And I trust you can hear as well. So this is just another map showing what Deborah was talking about how the current districts are aligned with the precinct boundaries. And I'll skip my next slide, which was just sort of showing that there are some areas where there have been some slight changes to precinct boundaries, but they tend to be in areas like this. This is where the River and Warren Creek meet, and it doesn't affect population. So this is a generalized school board redistricting timeline, and you can see we started it in June. That was when the General Assembly actually passed some legislation that gave some clarity, especially for other local governments where there were conflicting information and complications because of the calendar being different. But you can see on the bar here, we're starting from June, but today is marked here, and we're going through the end of the year. And essentially this, I need to update this because we expected the data to be delivered on the 16th, but it's now the 12th. And what's really important here, I think, is the difference between today's date and a date here in mid-November. And so this shows this is 11.4 weeks. I had taken possible 2 weeks needed for processing of the data that was delivered today, but thankfully there have been some other folks who are working on that. And so it's easier to kind of hit the ground running with this data than anticipated. So we're still looking at basically going from mid-August to mid-November. So around 3 months. And the boards of elections are requesting multiple weeks for processing the data before filing period begins, which I believe is December 6th. So I believe that the board has a meeting on November 18th. That would kind of be the final, that would be the kind of the very end of this purple arrow. I know it says November 17th. That's what the deadline has been set at for counties, but there has not been a statutory requirement, as I understand it, for school boards. So November 18th would be possible, or perhaps a October 21st meeting too. There's certainly no problem with getting it done earlier. I think that is pretty much covering it. This is when, yeah, I think these are details we could talk about, but this is covering the basic gist of the window of time that's available. And I have a calendar in front of me as well, a paper calendar with multiple Thursday meetings that I have blocked out in case I need to be in Durham for meetings. And unless there's something else, I think I will stop sharing my screen. I'm happy to put it back up if there are questions.
Thank you, Blake. So I think that was my last slide. You can go to the last one. I think it's just questions. Yeah. So I'm happy to answer any questions. I think, again, if you can give some guidance tonight, that's great. If you want to think about the list of redistricting criteria or guiding principles I talked about and come back at a later time, But once those are in place, again, if the board decides to have us work with you, then to draw those districts, then as Tanya said, we have come together with some other attorneys, Blake, another demographer, to provide redistricting services to school boards and counties and cities across the state. We've offered a flat rate package of $17,500 that includes the legal advice. I think there may have been a sheet that I sent with this. I don't know if it made it into the packet or not, but that, visits to come talk about redistricting, visits to come present the maps, coming to a public hearing to explain it, drafting the resolution, answering questions by phone. So that's 2 to 3 sets of maps that you would want to look at. Because Durham Public Schools is a regular client of Tharrington Smith, if you would prefer to just have the flat fee for the demographer services of $10,000 and just pay an hourly rate for legal services, we could also do that as well. But we would certainly not have a not to exceed number of 17,500. So again, I think that's a number that's below the board's requirement for a board vote, but certainly want to be transparent about how the process is working and make sure that you have all your questions answered. And I can answer other questions about the process, about what you take into account, what happens, if the maps don't work the way you want it and you don't like the first round that comes out. So I'm happy to answer any questions at this point.
Thank you so much, Ms. Stagner, and thank you, Blake. We can't see you, but boy, we're excited to have this data. I'm not being sarcastic at all. I mean, there are people that tuned in for this, and I'm being serious. And I feel like we're ahead. Like, despite all kinds of things, we have the potential to actually get some genuine public feedback on this, which is super important to us going forward. Let me see what colleagues think and what's on y'all's hearts and minds. There's Blake. Now we see you. Fantastic. I have questions, but I want to lean into y'all. I was the old one here when we did this before, and Ms. Stagner did an excellent job leading us through that process.
Natalie, I just want to say thank you. That was a crystal clear presentation, at least for my learning style, and I'm prepared to follow the lead of the board and contribute.
Yes, Ms. Valladares.
Really appreciate the presentation, also sharing some of the guidelines and some of the values, even nonpartisan, et cetera. I have a question about considering areas of potential growth in the upcoming decade. I know we have city planning, looking at some data, neighborhoods and all that. Like, how is this work kind of interlapping with some of the planning that is happening at the city? And how are you also gauging communities that are in growth, potential growth for the upcoming decade as we are projecting ahead of time?
Well, again, so that's not a requirement, but it's certainly something that you might, because you do have fast growing areas of the county, you might want to keep that in mind. And I'm going to actually let Blake field that one, because I think that's his bailiwick. And I don't know, I think that he probably has the ability to connect with some of the folks in your city and county planning departments. He's got a lot of experience in that area. But Blake, can you want to take a stab at that?
Sure. So yes, if directed to do so, to take into account anticipated growth, there are multiple sources that I could connect with. And just as it happens, I used to work in local government in a planning department. So I speak the language, and certainly in talking with planners at Durham County as well as the city, and often the school staff have very knowledgeable people because of course they're having to think ahead as far as where population is growing. So between those, I think there will be ample opportunity to get a sense of where the growth is expected. And I really enjoy having those conversations. It's interesting to learn about this, and Durham certainly will be an interesting case given how sizable the growth has been, and as far as I understand, is anticipated to continue to be.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, we've had a lot of learnings. I mean, just watching over the years, like even where we build schools, like projections in North Durham and then having to build schools in South Durham. And a lot of that, has been like a recurrent lesson of like, how are we also keeping in with all the information that is available, through work that is happening. So it can all add and contribute to our knowledge and all that. I'm also, as somebody who's, from a growing community in Durham, I'm very eager and would like to hear about how, in terms of representation in your team, like, are you also taking into account like representation? Like, what does your team look like? What is your team doing in terms of like keeping into account, like, while I understand that this is not like racially based and some of the things that from the earlier presentations is not going to be tighter than that, but as we're looking more for projections, like in the next 10 years, what are some communities, how are some ways that you're partnering with groups that are looking at minority growth in Durham?
So we don't have a standard or sort of a template format for that. I think when that comes in really through the public engagement and giving the opportunities for those communities and making sure the word gets out, but making sure that those people in the community that have interest in having their voices heard in this process have the opportunity to do so. And so as far as our team, it's Blake and I. I mean, so that's it. But we are happy to provide the information. So Blake will not only provide the maps, but also show what the population looks like, and have that information out there available to the public, so that those stakeholders, those interest groups, those, just individuals that want to come and be heard about what the maps look like, what the districts are going to look like, can be heard and have the board take that into account. It's really not about what we think your districts ought to look like. It's you're giving the guidance to us, and we, and I say we, Blake is going to, do the technical piece of that. I'm going to be here to make sure that you're following the legal principles and that you're not going to get in trouble and get a lawsuit or anything. I wouldn't expect that to happen, but I, try to make sure that we're complying with the law, that we do all the procedural pieces correctly. Blake draws the maps. He's going to do that analysis of the population and put together some proposals for you. But it's really about the Board of Education hearing the public feedback and making the decision ultimately, because it is your decision. So encourage the community to participate. And I know Durham doesn't need a lot of encouragement. You have a very engaged, and that's a great thing, to have an engaged public to be interested in this topic, because it really is, it's very important. And I'm glad to see, opportunities. And that's why we're really encouraging to have as many meetings as you can stand that we can fit into, the next 3 months, so that people can be heard and have, and so that you get the feedback that you need to make those good decisions.
Mr. Lee, and I thought Ms. Umstead.
Just a quick question. When you're considering the redrawing of the districts themselves, is this the place where, if needed, we would consider extra seats or removing seats? Is that part of the redistricting process? It doesn't look like there's a big jump anywhere where there would need extra seats or anything like that, but I was curious, is that, if it were, is this the juncture where you start to talk about extra seats, or is that a different thing altogether?
Yeah, and that's a very common question, and the answer is no. So the North Carolina General Statutes 115C-37A provides a general rule for county boards of education to have, and it's 5-member board elected at large for 4-year terms. As you know, and many school boards across the state have a different method that deviates from that statutory method, because either it's been set by a local rule by the General Assembly, like you all have for the merger plan, which set your districts, or a court order. So the board doesn't have the authority to change its number of districts or how it elects its members. That would have to be something that would be done through local legislation. So we can rebalance and redraw the 7 districts or the 6 districts that you have, but you can't change that method.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Sunset, and then catch.
Thank you all for the presentation and the information. It was really helpful to understand what we have to do moving forward. I think it would be good for us to sit with this information for a while, talk with community, and come back to share the criteria or guidelines that we want to think about. What timeline for that would you like to see? Is that our next meeting in 2 weeks, or is that like something we could do in September?
So I may again ask Blake to weigh in on this, because your adoption of those guidelines is really the direction to him of how to go forward and draw the map. So his timeline is going to be dictated by how soon he gets that information. So Blake, I don't know if you have any strong feelings about 2 weeks versus next month's meeting.
I don't. I think actually, as one of the board members said, there were, while this is a compressed time frame compared to what we usually have, where we are getting started at an early point. And I think there is time for that consideration. And if that's what the board would prefer, I don't see a difference between 2 weeks and 4 weeks. I do have the September 23rd. I don't need to be present for that meeting for the consideration of criteria, but I may have a conflict on September 9th. So for what that's worth.
And the way we would sort of foresee this working is that Blake would be here in person, ideally, COVID allowing, to be there when the maps, the first, proposed or draft plans are presented. So he can really be here and talk you through that. And he could be here at another meeting for maybe a public hearing to explain it if there are any questions and that kind of thing. I can be here at one or both of those meetings as well. I can be here when you adopt your final resolution, or I would just provide that ahead of time. So, we can be here, but we don't have to be here for every single meeting when you're taking some action. So if you want to send us something, and, I'm glad to come or be remote next time as well, but it's certainly not required.
Thank you. I think if we sit with this and bring it back at our September 9th for thinking about criteria, and then I can work with you all to think about what the rest of that timeline might need to look like, so we can go ahead and schedule public hearings and that kind of thing, if that's okay with everybody.
And you all are fortunate you meet on Thursdays. Our Mondays and Tuesdays are booked up between now and the rest of the end of the year, but Thursdays make it a little easier on our end for scheduling too. So we'll be glad to work with you on that.
Great, Mr. Raven.
The one thing that I would like to request is just it's data. When I'm looking at this document and I'm having to scroll back between pages 7 and 13, because on 7 is the chart that you all had where it was color coded, so you could see the different districts from one another. And then on slide 13, you had it where it has all the specific precincts, voting precincts in it. And it would be nice if that could also be color coded to match the districts. So people could literally just look at this map and be able to tell, okay, 30-2, that's going to be 4B or something like that. And if it could be made in a high resolution, because just keeping in mind, some people, when they first look at this, they could only be looking at it on their phone. So being able to just have the ability to zoom in and really be able to take a look at all the natural pathways that are included on it, I think that would be beneficial to people that are joining in from their phone. So that's my only request. So thank
We
you.
will absolutely do that. And I will apologize up front for the crudeness of the original maps in this PowerPoint, because it's a PowerPoint. It is not as usable, and Blake will provide some excellent maps that you can post on your website that people can look at and have that much better resolution. This was really just sort of the the high level concept presentation, but point well taken. Although I'll say when I did this, 20 years ago and then 10 years ago, we were doing a lot of paper maps that we blew up at Kinko's. And so we've progressed a lot in the last 10 years. Thank you.
Thank you. That was my only question.
Thank you. Ms. Stagner, I am so appreciative of you all, and I agree with Ms. Umstead's idea that we discuss guiding principles at the first work session in September. I hope that we can perhaps put some of this information on our website in a place that people can find it, give us their feedback so that we can come prepared with their ideas, our community's ideas about guiding principles as we get started. I lean a little bit more towards being aggressive and trying to finish this by October because our poor Board of Elections is going to be running an election for mayor and city council right now, and then getting ready for December filing for this. So any grace that we can give them and having a little bit more time, I think would be generous. Can you help me understand? I know we cannot use race, but what I love about Durham's districts is that these districts were actually designed to be more representative. They were designed so that our board was not, I don't know, I don't want to even say what they were designed for. As we overlay gentrification on this community and on these districts, I think it would be important to kind of pay attention to what some of the precincts are doing and the changes within the last 10 years. And can we how do we respect what the initial districts were drawn for Durham with, which was to be equitable, like way back in the day, if that makes sense?
It really is a tough sort of tightrope to walk because you cannot take race into account as one of your primary factors, but you're certainly not blind to the fact of what the composition of your community looks like. And so you will get, and again, I'll ask Blake to jump in if I'm overstepping, but the information will be provided. I mean, you will give race neutral guiding principles, so to speak, but you will have the information about what the districts look like based on the census data, because that information is out there. And so, to the extent that it becomes very apparent that there's an issue with some group being disadvantaged, you can address that to remedy a potential harm that might arise under the Voting Rights Act. So you're not taking race into account when you decide where to put the lines, but once you're looking at the lines, you can see, is there a problem? Have we created a problem that's going to have a disadvantage or a negative impact on a community? Does that make sense, or does that help you understand it a little better?
It does. Everything you say always helps. I just and even going to some of Ms. Valladares' points, I mean, especially when we have a population that are huge in our community, but might not have achieved voting right access, right? So how do you kind of make sure you?
Yeah, and that's one thing to keep in mind is that we are preparing districts that count every single person that is represented by the census numbers. I mean, we're legally prevented from using any other numbers other than the census numbers. So that's what we have to use. And unfortunately, we all know that there are undercounts in more or less in different areas. So, but we have to use the census numbers, but we do count everyone. We don't look at the voting age population to draw the districts. We look at the total population. So it's truly one person. It's called one person, one vote, but it's one person gets counted the same no matter what district they're in.
And Mr. Raven, and then Mr. Sutter.
Yeah, I wanted to follow up on something you said, Ms. Byer, and Blake, if you're still there, maybe you can add to this. If I'm not mistaken, and I'm not trying to use tech jargon, but I'm assuming that this is using the Esri platform to develop this map. So if we're looking for what Ms. Byer is asking, I'm wondering if we could just add like an additional layer on it that can show, it could be kind of like a data visualization that's showing like a heat map that doesn't necessarily show us the race of the people that are in the area, but it could actually show a heat map when it shows severe change in a demographic. That way, we're not necessarily asking for what's the change in race. We're just acknowledging that this precinct looks extremely different from the way it did maybe 10 or 20 years ago. So I'm wondering if that's like an additional map that could be used, because if we have a precinct, I don't know, 15, and it shows that the population has grown, we could see that number. But if it's extremely red, maybe that represents like a 30% change in the demographics of the people that are there now. So we're not using that as the predominant tool, but it just gives a little bit of additional information to the community, because they could easily feel that gentrification is the reason for this change. And we wanted to at least be able to address that. We're acknowledging that and just kind of showing them that we are considering all the variables that's available to us.
I'm definitely going to let Blake answer that one about heat maps.
The short answer is yes. Something like that is definitely doable. And I'd be happy to add that as a layer. And this goes back to, I think, the same board member's earlier question. One thing that might be an option is not just PDFs or static maps, but actually a map that is posted online and it is interactive. For a lot of what I do, I actually use an open source tool, which is not an Esri tool, but it has the same layering concept. And I expect to be using some Esri tools for things like the sharing of interactive maps. So this could even be something that someone could zoom around and pan and see and turn that layer on and off, that kind of thing. So that was a long answer, but the short answer is that's definitely something that we could look at.
Thank you.
Mr. Sudrith, I saw you had some.
You made a reference to putting the information on the DPS website. I'll need to do some hunting to get some human resource to help me with it, but this seems like a perfect opportunity for engage.dpsnc.net, the Bang the Table platform that we've used for several community engagement opportunities. So if we can sort of define the parameter so it's sort of manageable, we can, and if we know the questions to ask our community, we can give them the opportunity for some feedback on district lines in advance of your work session.
That would be great. I've seen some municipalities delay this work and keep themselves in office longer. And I don't think, I'm so glad that we're actually addressing it and addressing it well, even during the pandemic, and looking for ways to actually have community engagement. And that's going to be so important. You all have other thoughts, questions? This is here for action because we're spending some money, Ms. Giovanni. And
as Ms. Stagner stated, this is obviously a smaller amount below it, but in order to be completely transparent, and since it's directly the board's work and outside of administration, I am requesting that the board make a motion and allow us to spend up to the $17,500, and then we would obviously work with Mr. Sue and Dr. Mubanga to make a determination on what's the most fiscally efficient. If 17.5 is the maximum amount, then it would make more sense probably for us to do 10,000. And I'm looking at you, Mr. Lesueur, to do the 10,000 and then pay the hourly fee. I believe we get a reduced hourly fee. Deborah, is that right? From Tharrington.
So, yeah, so, my work with redistricting is at a higher rate than what our normal retainer agreement is with Durham Public Schools. So we would bill for all my regular school board clients, we're billing your regular hourly rate for legal services. But it would be, Blake's compensation is outside of that. So we would just, we have a contract and agreement with him. So we would bill you and pass along Blake's share.
thank you so much. If no further questions, I would welcome a motion on this item.
I move to accept administration's request that the board approve the service contract for the redistricting service so that the review process and map options for districts may begin immediately.
It's been moved by Mr. Raven and seconded by Ms. Valladares. Any further discussion? If not, we'll vote. Ms. Umstead,
Aye.
Mr. Lee,
Aye.
Mr. Raven,
Aye.
Ms. Valladares, Mr. Sears,
Aye.
and I vote aye as well. Thank you all. It passes unanimously. Thank you. That brings us to our favorite summary of follow-up items. I feel like
Okay. So the first item I have will be providing the board an update about making sure that our students and families can use personal devices to access NC Ed Cloud, Clever, and other platforms that we utilize. Developing plans to increase and encourage vaccination among staff and students, as well as implementing surveillance testing for both vaccinated and unvaccinated students and staff. Going along with that would be thinking about what are some ways that we can incentivize both students and staff to become vaccinated. Including a link on our web page to vaccination sites, as well as including in our Q&A, what happens when someone tests positive, what are our different procedures that we have. As it relates to the second item, looking at having the discussion for the criteria of board redistricting at the September the 9th meeting. Also providing high resolution maps for our website, which will likely be put on engage.dpsnc.net. Oh, got it. And then trying to complete the process by October.
that was a lot. It was a lot, and we thank you for all your attentiveness. That y'all's work has not slowed down since we were here. March of 2019, it has picked up speed and it has shifted and it has changed, and we are so appreciative. I'm not going to add another thing, but I know you're going to work on outdoor classroom learning, eating spaces, because we've talked about that so much. Thank you all. We cannot thank you enough, and we cannot thank our teachers and our principals and our staff enough. Any other thoughts before we I would welcome a motion on our
I move that we go, I move that we go into closed session for the reasons stated on the agenda.
Second.
been moved by Ms. Umstead and seconded by Mr. Raven that we go into closed session for the reasons stated on the agenda. Any further discussion? If not, Ms. Umstead,
Aye.
Mr. Lee,
Aye.
Mr. Raven,
Aye.
Ms. Valladares, Mr. Sears,
Aye.
and I vote aye as well. It is unanimous. We are in closed session. Thank you so much.
We are now back in open session. Dr. Mabenga.
But I'm here to ask your approval for the personnel report as discussed at the closed session.
Move approval of the personnel report dated August 12th, 2021.
Second?
Been moved and properly second. Any other discussion? Do a voice vote. Ms. Valladares. Mr. Raven.
Aye.
Mr. Lee.
Aye.
Ms. Byer.
Aye.
And I vote aye as well. It passes unanimously. And with that, we are adjourned. Before we adjourn, everyone, if you are not vaccinated, please go get vaccinated. There are plenty of places to go in Durham that you can walk in, go to Durham County's public health site. It's also on Instagram, on Facebook, on Twitter. Find a site, please go get vaccinated. Have a good evening.